up with the first, it cannibalized it. It swept it all up into this one big. The first, it cannibalized one that was emitted. Now, when that second sun, like coronal mass ejection, caught up with the first, it cannibalized it. It swept it all up into this one big wave of like these charged particles, and then they all swept towards the Earth. And then when they hit it, they caused a geomagnetic storm. Where they come from in how sunspots are created is magnetic fields are created on the sun. Like the sun is just a giant ball of plasma, so like there's loads of charged particles eddying and moving around on like inside the sun, across the sun's surface. Now when you have charged particles moving, you're going to induce some magnetism there. But because magnetic field lines can't cross, and you've got all these moving particles, like this giant traffic jam of particles moving everywhere, you'll inevitably get these field lines bunched up next to each other. They'll form into these tight knots that can't escape anywhere else, and eventually they will have to snap and release energy. Now they release energy either in the form of a solar flare, like a bright flare of radiation, or they'll release energy in the form of like chucking out some of that plasma from the sun.
What's the difference between solar flares and coronal mass ejections?
So solar flares is just the bright flash that you'll see of radiation,
okay,
from that field line snapping that energy release. A coronal mass ejection is some of the sun's like plasma soup actually being like burped out of the sun.
I love that phrase, plasma soup.
Yeah, tasty plasma soup.
Nice, I mean, pretty, but I mean, a little terrifying, right? I mean, yeah. Does it affect Earth?
So it does, but not in like not in an always really terrible way. Most of the time, the Earth has a pretty strong magnetic field, which is really, really good news for us because it protects us from all of these like highly energized particles that the sun has just spewed out at us. In this case, at like speeds of like 2 million miles per hour, which is just, I guess, 33 times less than the speed of light. Pretty quick. So what the Earth's magnetic field will do is it will absorb all of these particles. The energy will go into stretching out the magnetic field in space. So it's like, it's kind of bunched out towards it gives it a long tail. And then most of those particles will gather kind of towards the poles, where they will like go downwards and then energize some of the molecules in the atmosphere. And when these molecules in the atmosphere then give out light in order to kind of go down to a lower energy level, that's why we see the aurora. Now, because there's so many of these like particles coming in, you're getting auroras much lower down along the northern hemisphere than you would normally expect to see.
That's a nice effect there. And I know that people had already taken video from it. This is from Manitoba in Canada. Beautiful, just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And like, I think also you could see the aurora in the US, certainly like as far south as Pennsylvania, Iowa, and Oregon over the last 2 days as well.
Oh, right. On spaceweather.com that you guys were sharing information from, they showed some pictures. Purple. I mean, purple. What an aura that Earth is giving off of this aurora. And, you know, when you mentioned
Yeah.
But so, okay, so that's the good. How about damage?
Okay. Yes. So damage. So they can cause damage. So one of the most recent kind of power outages that was caused by a storm of this type was the 1989 Quebec power cut, which was caused by a geomagnetic storm. Now, most of the time, especially when it comes to people who provide like power lines and stuff, a lot of them have shielded like their like power cables and things like that with a kind of Faraday cage, basically, which diverts the energy. Or they also have like other techniques that allow them to kind of siphon off excess energy that might be given to power lines by storms like this.
Okay.
But like that hasn't always been the case. Like especially back in 1859, there was a really big event called the Great Carrington event, which was the largest sort of solar storm in modern human history. I'm sure there have been solar storms just as large throughout our past, but like before that point, we weren't really documenting it, and we didn't have many electronics around, so we didn't really care. But in this case, the Great Carrington event fried most of the telegram systems in the US and in Europe that had been developed at the time.
Really?
And it also led to auroras that could be seen around like as far south as the Caribbean. And like there were people waking up at night thinking that it was daytime in the Caribbean because of these enormous auroras from this event.
I mean, we're freaked out about it now when we see things like that. We know more, but I can't even imagine, you know, over 100 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of more modern sort of phenomena that have caused more modern damage, other than the Quebec event, recently actually there was another geomagnetic storm that caused the downing of 40 of SpaceX's Starlink satellites. That was one thing that happened. And on top of that as well, there's a potential risk that internet, like the internet in general, especially in the United States, could be cut out by a geomagnetic storm, because a lot of these cables run underwater through like latitudes that would be affected by it, and like you would have a geomagnetic storm. They're not shielded, so they would basically be probably quite severely affected by this. But as is the case with a lot of things and how they're done with like legislation, it's like earthquakes. It doesn't often get legislated for until the worst has already happened.
Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, I really like the internet. I like to keep it around. This is how we get to communicate, right?
Exactly.
Being across the pond.
Exactly.
But you're saying that we have protections now.
So I think most like power companies have already built in protections into their grids for these kind of things.
Okay.
It's just, yeah, you're not going to be getting any like, I guess, coronal mass ejection memes in the middle of a coronal mass ejection. You have to wait a few weeks for them to fix the underwater cables.
Yeah, and luckily Earth, you know, we have this nice electromagnetic shield, right, already built in. Otherwise, we'd be, you know, goners. You know,
yeah, it would fry us, and it would also fry our atmosphere. Like a big reason why Mars doesn't have much of an atmosphere, for instance, is it doesn't really have a very active magnetic field. So all of the atmosphere, when it gets hit by these wave of like hydrogen like particles, like protons, like the atmosphere gets stripped away quite quickly.
Poor Mars. Poor Mars.
Yeah.
But that's why we're here, right? We're not. I mean, we are on Mars, but you know, not yet.